wrote. Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto claimed Karin Uzumaki as his passionate wife, part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Naruto glared intently at the Uchiha standing on the crystal waters of the river. The waters had finally calmed to a steady flow. The clashes of the weak versions of their attacks made the river fluctuate for quite some time. Just imagine the full power. Naruto stood tall in all of his orange-loving glory, his deep blue eyes glowing with animosity. The boy trembled slightly as he and his best friend continued the stare down of the ages. Neither broke eye contact as they continued to gauge each other's power and strength, seeing as the two of them were nothing but power. If we fight, Naruto suddenly began. We'll both die. The river fluctuated once more as a great breeze of wind flowed down from the top of the bridge. Leaves flittered down covering the line of sight for both boys. The silence was unending, even with the shuffling of leaves and trees within the newfound wind. Sasuke continued his glare as his once black eyes began to dull out into a dark gray. But then, the last Uchiha shut his eyes and heaved a sigh, before smirking maliciously. Then I guess, Sasuke paused and activated his Sharingan once the Zetsu began to rise from beneath the water. I'll kill you before you kill me. With that said, Sasuke was into the portal of Tobi and the two vanished into thin air with the Zetsu clones disappearing into the river. Naruto kept his glare up but looked away and faced Sakura and Kakashi before turning a deep shade of purple. Sakura's eyes shot from her head. She dashed for the boy and grabbed him before he fell into the river. She had a meek look on her face, and gave a small embarrassed smile to her sensei. I forgot that the Kunai was poisoned. Sakura let out a wry laugh and sighed in defeat. Naruto, hold still and I'll heal you. And no problem. Naruto groaned slightly as he rested his head in her chest. Healing chakra sprang up around her hand and began to soothe the pain radiating across his cheek and closing off the cut and removing the poison in the process. Naruto's face soon began to regain color and almost immediately, the boy was back to normal with the Kyuubi aiding in the healing process. Naruto quickly removed himself from Sakura's embrace and coughed awkwardly. The three of them jumped up the large bridge and headed towards the wounded prisoner. She was a red-headed girl with half of her hair being wild and all over the place and her other half being straight. She wore thick-rimmed glasses and had red eyes. She was lying against the railing of the bridge with a distraught look on her face as she came to the realization that Sasuke was no longer the same as what he once was. Nowhere near. A few footsteps were ahead and the girl painfully turned and faced the three Konoha shinobi standing at the other end of the bridge. She looked down and was hoisted up and piggybacked Kakashi as they left the scene. Her red hair waved softly as they tree-hopped away for their unconscious teammates and comrades. Her glasses began to slip down her nose, but were caught on Kakashi's neck guards. What is going on? Karin looked tiredly at the team carrying her back to Konoha. Damn that Uchiha, after all that I've done. Within seconds, she began to look over her life and everything that has led up to this point. A life filled with disappointment and lies. Promises unfulfilled, the wrong crowds and false love. Her eyes trailed down at the grass below their feet and took a deep sorrowful breath, but tried not to strain herself too much. The group made a quick detour and headed into the forest off the main road and found a small clearing with 4 bodies lying on the ground, 3 men and a large dog. All 4 of them began to wake up thanks to Sakura administering the antidote and healing their bodies and removing the poison from their systems. Almost immediately, Kiba burst into anger and began to scream at Sakura for how stupid she was and how little she had thought the situation through. But through all of this, the golden-haired boy of the group kept to himself and stared aimlessly into the grand forest surrounding them. One by one, Karin began to examine the Konoha ninja's chakra signatures and one by one, she got a very good idea as to how these shinobi acted, thought and moral codes were. The pale-skinned black-haired shinobi was an enigma, and basically had a chakra aligning itself slowly with good. The dog and the kid with the fang tattoos on his cheeks, although loud and brash in person, his chakra was strong and peaceful and really loyal too. But the one that already had Karin slightly worried, and this is just from physical appearance, she was staring at the bowl-cut boy wearing the god-awful green jumpsuit. But even though she couldn't tell where his chakra coils were, she could sense the chakra there, and to be frank, she was impressed. The group, now fully healed and ready to continue on their journey back to the home village, Karin was fully awake and in less pain, but in pain nonetheless. But as they continued on their journey, the blonde-orange-wearing shinobi was constantly arguing with the dog boy, as Karin began to call the tattooed boy. She was surprised by the interaction between Konoha shinobi and their comrades. With a moment of boredom, she actually listened in on their conversation. Naruto baka. Kiba finished with only the last part of the sentence being heard. Naruto. Karin's eyebrows rose slightly. That's the Naruto that Sasuke constantly griped about. Naruto clenched his fists and replied with a not up to par rebuttal, resulting in a punch to the back of the head, via Haruno Sakura. Naruto was bent over gripping his head, all the while, laughing with Kiba and Sakura. Soon enough, the laughter was contagious and had the rest of the team laughing, except for Karin. Her eyes were wide as she used her abilities to try and get a better feel of the shinobi that caused her former beau so much annoyance. You unbelievable, what is this chakra? Karin felt her body soar high into the sky. It was almost as if her pain and inhibitions were released from her body. It's such, amazingly, peaceful chakra, never have I ever felt something like this. Karin tightened her grip around Kakashi and tilted her head into Kakashi's back, almost as if she was about to go to sleep, but there was a sudden darkness in the pit of her stomach as she continued to examine the shinobi. That darkness continued, and seemed to never end, pressurizing her into the pits of her mid. All around her, she felt the colors bleed into red and black. Karin looked up and around the blonde boy and found that he was surrounded by an aura that had eerie resemblance to a great nine-tailed fox. Karin had never once been so terrified. What really scared her though, was the untamable power that resided deep within the boy had her terrified that she was going to the same village as he was. That kind of power wasn't even felt when she and the former Team Taka took on the Eight Tails Jinchuriki. Karin tried to come up with a conclusion as to why he held such malicious power within his body, but filed it away for another time when she realized that she'd been staring at the back of the blonde's head. Her cheeks lit up slightly. She looked away and stared at the ground for a while. It'll be a while before I get into anyone like that, Karin whispered. The rest of the journey was quiet. No, it wasn't quiet, but rather, not as loud as it normally would have been. With Naruto off in his own little world thinking about his difficult situation with Sasuke, Kiba saying something stupid and the others not really saying much, it left Karin with much to think about, namely, where she stood, now that she was no longer aligned with anyone. I'll most likely get arrested and thrown into jail, Karin mentally shivered. Or worse, I'll get executed. Karin reached over with her hand and weakly pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose and somehow, once more, his gaze landed on the figure of Uzumaki Naruto. Karin continued to stare and was genuinely surprised at his appearance. Everything Sasuke said, Karin thought. It's almost as if Sasuke was jealous of him. This Naruto is nothing like the one that Sasu, the Uchiha, always spoke about. Naruto put his arms behind his head and started to walk slowly for just a moment. He was lost in his own thoughts as he stared off into the trees above them. The small rays of light tickling his whiskered cheeks and bouncing off of his sun-kissed hair. Naruto stopped suddenly and took a small breath before sighing in content and continuing forward. Karin quickly noticed that Sakura had a flash of worry on her face, only for it to disappear before she could examine the Pinket's expression any further. Karin shut her eyes and took the same action, making Kakashi turn his head slightly. The Junin gave her a small look, but then gave her an eye smile. Karin raised an eyebrow and rested her chin in his shoulder, knowing that she is still too weak to walk on her own. Kakashi simply fixed her position on his back and sped up the pace since he was starting to fall behind Kiba. The Cyclops of a Junin sped up his steps and started to catch up to the somewhat speeding blonde just a few clicks away from him. Once he caught up with Naruto, Kakashi looked over to see Naruto had no expression on his face. Naruto's cerulean eyes were glimmering and looked deep in thought. Karin saw this, and for the first time, she had seen his face up close and was surprised by his facial appearance. From all of the descriptions that Sasuke gave her, she had half expected Naruto to be some god-awful thing to look at, but to tell the truth, she felt that the blonde wasn't too bad. He looked over from the corner of his eyes and gave Karin a small smile. Karin felt her face heat up from just how bright his smile actually was. Suddenly, she sensed a great burst of peace and happiness radiate from the blonde smiling at her. His glinting teeth seemed a bit much, but Karin seemed to not mind the sight. But there was a sudden burst from that peace once more. It was powerful and it filled her mind with darkness. Everything was thrown in a 1,000-mile-per-hour downward spiral. But from the darkness, the girl was met with two powerful blood-red eyes that glared menacingly into her own crimson eyes. Her skin shuddered, and grew cold in the presence of such powerful orbs. She could feel her chakra fluctuating because of the powerful force that seemed to practically be breathing in her face. Her eyes were wide when she saw what seemed to be the face of a beautiful, light-skinned, redhead with the most beautiful violet eyes that Karin had ever seen. The image was seen in the center of the slitted irides of the beast glaring at her. The woman gave Karin a small smirk, and tilted her head as she looked at the red-eyed girl. Karin's eyes were wide and filled with fear. Karin felt her jaw unhinge, and felt her heart race in fear. This boy that she sensed is filled with such strange secrets that Karin couldn't even fathom. But the dark chakra narrowed its blood-red eyes and sent a major burst of its own chakra, nearly scaring Karin off of Kakashi's back. Looking back to the normal world, Karin found that she was now on the ground. Sakura and the others were looking at her with worried expressions, despite the fact that she was an enemy. But once Naruto came into the scene, Karin saw a quick flash of the crimson eyes staring at her through Naruto's own blue. The redhead had seen a lot of scary things in her life, but never had she ever felt that dark. Never had she felt that terrified. In a quick move without thinking, she started backing away once Naruto reached forward with his hand. A small pang of hurt reverberated through his heart. He looked down and slowly retracted his hand, but Karin quickly reached out and grabbed it. With a quick and brisk apology, Naruto lifted her from the ground and carried her on his own back, rather than Kakashi's. Karin's sensing abilities were exploding in all directions from the amount of dark chakra shooting off of Naruto's body. Karin gripped tightly, tighter than what she did with Kakashi. Actually, with Kakashi, she held him loosely, hence the fact she fell off. Naruto nearly choked from the amount of pressure she was pressing on his neck, but immediately loosened. "Oi, Naruto," Kiba started, "I think the redhead likes you." "How youthful Naruto-kun," Lee howled. "I don't like him, I am just making sure that I don't fall off again." Karin roared back, nearly causing Naruto's eardrums to burst. "You baka. Now, no need to get feisty." Kakashi gave her another eye smile. "We're all trying to go to the same place now. Don't worry," Naruto said in a reassuring voice. "We'll get there all fine and then we'll all go our separate ways." At the village, Naruto was walking towards his most frequented place in the entire village, Ichiraku Ramen. His stomach grumbled and tumbled as he walked through the streets of his home village. Everything around him was making good progress in being rebuilt, especially with the help of Yamato's Mokuten Jutsu. A small smile grew on his lips as the civilians began to cheer his name and wave lovingly towards their newest hero. Some even went so far as to say, "I hope you become Hokage one day." Naruto didn't know if they were kissing up to him, or if they were truly genuine in their words. For so long, he was ostracized and made an outcast by many of the people that cheered his name. For the longest time, The only form of interaction between him and the villagers was the occasional blurb of harsh words, or even going full out and actually kicking him or tossing him about, or just downright slandering him in any way they could, be it talking behind his back, or insulting him to his face. But now, he didn't know how to respond to their kind words and kind actions. So, he simply hunched his shoulders slightly and looked down towards the dirt road with a light blush on his cheeks. Making a quick turn, Naruto walked towards the nearest exit and took the quickest detour towards Ichiraku. After all of those years of running off to find a quiet and secluded place to cry, gave Naruto an imaginary map of the entire village, one that is burned into his mind probably to the end of his days. Looking up, Naruto felt his eyes light up from the sight of the little paper lantern moving swiftly in the blowing wind. The new Ichiraku ramen stand was no longer a nice hut with cloth hanging over the front of the stand, but instead, it was its own actual restaurant with a large counter and multiple seats. The coloration paid a great homage to their favorite customer, by coloring much of the store orange and black. Naruto smiled devilishly and charged in, sliding the rice paper door open, completely forgetting his predicament, and jumped onto a stool with drool already flowing down the sides of his mouth. He slammed his hands onto the counter, getting the attention of Tsuki. 5 bowls of miso ramen. Naruto roared with a loud laugh. And keep 'em coming, old man. You got it, Naruto. Tsuki started laughing and called the orders out to his ever-faithful daughter, Ayame, whom of which was working furiously with the order. Naruto sat in silence as the intoxicating smells of the wondrous ramen came floating into his nose. But the wooden doors suddenly slid open. With Ayame and Tsuki in the back working on the orders, in came 2 Chunin that witnessed Naruto's battle with pain. They were surprised and actually relieved, it seemed, to see Naruto. "Hey," one of them shouted out with a smile. "It's the hero of Konoha." "You're right," the other laughed. The elder one quickly walked up to a seat next to Naruto and pulled out a notebook. "Please, honor me with your autograph. My son would love it if you did." "Same here, my daughter would love it if you signed an autograph for her." The other shinobi joined in. Naruto turned red from embarrassment. Looking around for whatever escape he had, he tuned out the 2 shinobi and tried to listen in for whatever distraction he could take advantage of. Thanks to the newly renovated Ichiraku ramen stand, the Ichirakus hired a full staff of waiters, cooks and even delivery men and women. So once Tsuki got the order of deep-fried pork cutlets, the order came out first. With a ring of the counter bell, Tsuki got the attention of one of his delivery men. But Naruto quickly kawaramied with the delivery man and took the order himself and started running away as fast as he could towards wherever he could. After he felt that he was a good distance away from Ichiraku ramen, he looked around and found that the street he was on was quite desolate and empty. He sighed and sat against the nearest wall and slid down and rested on the ground, placing the order next to him. He leaned his head on the wall and stared at the deep blue sky without a thought in his mind. But, then, he realized that the order belonged to someone. He frantically opened the casing and stared at the destination, the T&I Department of Konoha Intelligence. He shut the casing for to-go food and shot to his feet. He looked up and found that the sun was still high in the sky, with a lot of time still remaining in his day. So why couldn't he play deliveryman for the day? So, he took his sweet time making his way towards the T&I Department building. Now though, the streets towards the building were empty. Almost no one populated the area. Naruto smiled slightly, but didn't let it show. The cheers and the kind smiles were something that was going to take time to grow on him, and he was sure of it. Naruto took a right and headed down a great hill and found that grass was already growing and tree saplings were seen sprouting from the flattened ground. Naruto smirked at the village and how well it was bouncing back from the invasion of pain. Taking another detour and finding the surprisingly small building labeled with the symbol of the T&I Department of Intelligence on the front, Naruto opened the door and walked inside of the building and headed for the prison rooms. It was a quaint journey, no one to mock him or insult him, no one that begged for him to let them free, and best of all, no new fans to bother him. He found the only room holding any people within it and knocked. There was a quick reply and the door slid open to reveal Karin sitting in a chair while picking her nails while two interrogators were bickering like children and Ibiki was rubbing his temples. Naruto held in his laughter remembering the terrifying and imposing figure that Ibiki was as a man. The blonde walked ahead and shivered in fear once Ibiki stood from his seat. The larger and older man kindly took the casing of food and started laying out the meal in front of the redhead sitting behind the table. "You've got your food, now eat up," Karin ordered this. Naruto asked. "Why? She runs a hard bargain for information." Ibiki groaned. "Why don't you join in on the interrogation, Naruto? Since my two subordinates are being less than adequate." Why not?" Naruto sighed and pulled up a seat and sat next to Ibiki. "I was hoping that I could eat my ramen by now." "Okay, now tell us what you know of the Akatsuki and what they're planning," Ibiki said with a voice that demanded respect. "You have literally no reason to hold back information." "Hold on," Karin replied with a small smirk. "I just need to finish my delicious pork cutlets, Kami. You Konoha people sure know how to cook. I'm impressed." "Don't try changing the subject, Karin." Naruto grabbed her shoulders. But suddenly, the two disappeared in a puff of smoke. Somewhere, the smoke cleared and the two were now in a vaguely familiar room, well to Naruto that is. Once the smoke was officially cleared, the two looked around awkwardly and found that Lord Fukasaku and Lady Shima were sitting at the other side of the table with wide eyes. Karin's eyes bugged from her head and she nearly freaked out from being in the presence of toads of all things. Then she looked down to see caterpillars, insects of varying sizes. She quickly shot a hand to her mouth to hold in her incoming gag. "Fukasaku-sama, Shima-ba-chan." Naruto cried out and dropped Karin off of the table and headed off to give the two toad sages the tightest hug he could muster. "Wait, what in the world am I doing here? What the heck is she doing here?" Fukasaku asked. "I thought we only summoned Naruto-chan." These two were apparently in physical contact. Shima replied. "Well, young lady, whom might you be?" Karin. The redhead replied. "And no surname that I know of." "Well then, how were you two in contact with one another?" Shima asked. Karin was surprised by the amount of chakra that the two elder toads possessed. To be frank, the girl was slightly terrified. I was interrogating her," Naruto quickly replied. "She was a part of Sasuke's team, so she could possibly have information about the Akatsuki and what they're doing with Sasuke." "So she's an enemy?" Fukasaku asked with a raised eyebrow. Karin's eyes nearly widened when she felt a chakra spike from the green toad. But before Karin could reply, Naruto raised a hand and shook his head. He then turned his head and looked at the redhead sitting in one of the seats. Karin was surprised to say the least. She barely knew this guy, but he was so quick to defend her against whatever these toads meant to him. She felt his chakra fluctuate in a way that made his actions seem genuine. He had a stern look on his face as he stared the two toads down. "There won't be any need to kill her, or dispose of her," Naruto said. "She's under my protection since it's my fault that she's here." "Are you sure, Naruto-chan?" Shima asked. "I am dead serious, Shima-ba-chan." Naruto smiled softly. "Besides, Ka-chan seems to like her." Outside, the group began to walk towards their destination and seemed to be making a good walk, although the walk was plagued by the innate rambling of Karin. Naruto was confused and seemed to be wondering and worrying about the redhead's sanity. But then after at least 10 minutes of blocking her out, he sighed and decided to listen in on what the redhead was saying. "I seduced him, I helped him for nothing. That damned Uchiha tried to even kill me. The nerve of that guy." Karin placed her hands on her hips and glared viciously towards nothing. "And yet, why do I feel this way for him? Why didn't he feel the same? Was there someone else? Was it because I wasn't smart or strong enough? Am I not attractive?" Karin sighed and looked down, stopping suddenly. "I bet it's because of my cursed red hair. Why the hell does this sound familiar?" Naruto thought with a strange look marring his face. Suddenly a bright blush formed on his cheeks and he quickly forced his hands into his pocket and started walking forward with a quick pace. The images of the first meeting of his mother came flittering in his mind. She's almost exactly like Ka-chan. Well, actually it's because of your red hair that I think you're beyond beautiful. Naruto suddenly blurted out. Did I just say that? Naruto. Karin looked at him with a light blush growing on her cheeks. What did you say? Nothing. Let's just continue on to the Great Toad Sage. Naruto started walking faster trying to get away from the red-headed girl. But, Karin looked with a distraught expression on her face. Whatever, he probably didn't even mean it. Karin charged forward and followed Naruto with the same pace that he was going at and followed the toads towards the central husk. The four entered and bowed to the various toads staring at them and walked through the great structure towards the Great Toad Sage of Mount Myoboku. A great door was opened and they came to see the sight of a massive toad with a grand hat on his head. Hey, I kinda, Karin was starting to stutter in the presence of such great beings. There was so much that she didn't know about Naruto, and most of those things, she could do without knowing. Can I go back? If you want to stay in a prison cell for an unspecified amount of time instead of hanging with Konoha's #1 knuckle-headed ninja, then go ahead. Naruto said without a single stutter. You could stay with me and I'll be able to let you walk around and be free, to an extent. What do you mean? Karin asked, slightly worried for what he meant. With a quick sensing of his chakra, she found nothing wrong that would signify any evil intent with his words. I mean, stay under my protection. Naruto replied. With me, the village won't bother someone under the protection of the hero. I mean, thanks, but why? Karin asked. Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know me. Does that really matter? Naruto asked with a small smile. We could get to know each other. Enemy or not, it doesn't matter to me. I guess, Karin sighed and walked closer to Naruto. So what are you, and what is all of this? Well, for starters, this is the home of the Toad Summons. I am the Toad Sage, the only shinobi Toad Sage alive. Naruto began. I have mastered Senjutsu, and that big toad is the Great Toad Sage. That's amazing. Karin looked around the room with wide eyes as she examined every crack and crevice and started sensing the large toads surrounding them from the corners and the walls and outside of the building. Everything has chakra, it's amazing. The old Toad Sage began. Who are you again? Karin and Naruto face faulted and glared somewhat at the old senile toad. Karin was the first to straighten up, but then Naruto followed shortly. He was glaring at the old toad, but then, the wrinkled lips of the toad began to crease and began to open. I have received another prophecy, the future, he began. It will be one filled with great strife, a great battle will rage between every shinobi, and a clan will be restored and the other will be destroyed. Either the clan of the red eyes or the clan of the red hair, and whichever path you choose, it will decide how the world will either end or be rebirth. How do I do this? Naruto asked. How do I even begin to take a hold of this prophecy? The Kyuubi. Another toad said. You must control the beast in order to bring peace. It is the first key to the door that opens to your true potential. But with this key, there is another. The toad elongated itself and Karin nearly gagged at the sight. The toad unraveled its scroll body and it came to reveal a complex seal formula drawn upon the scroll. On the far right though, there was an Uzumaki swirl with a box on top of it. The toad nodded at Naruto knowing that the boy knew full well of what he was to do. Wait, Karin suddenly said. The Kyuubi, didn't the Yondaime kill the beast? No, Naruto replied. In truth, he sealed the beast inside of me. I am the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. And this seal was devised by the fourth to allow me to control the beast. Naruto-chan. Fukasaku chided. I don't think it's wise to give information so freely to enemies, former or not. I know, Naruto replied, but I trust her. Anyway, let's get this going on. A flame of chakra formed on each fingertip as he placed his palm onto the empty box. The chakra burned into the scroll and the seals began to grow from his chakra, and spread onto his body. Karin started to examine the sudden change and began to feel an overflow of chakra coming from the seal's power, almost as if someone's life force was being transferred into the boy. She could sense the chakra and she had to say, it felt vaguely familiar. Using her knowledge she started to think of whose chakra it was. But then thinking back to the conversation, Naruto said that the fourth created the seal. The chakra felt familiar because of the fact that the chakra belonged to someone she knew. Then she recognized it, the untamable fire within the chakra that showed off the different colors of the person's will. It was so powerful that Karin couldn't miss it. It was beautiful and it filled her with strength. She stared at the chakra flowing into Naruto's body and into his chakra coils. As she watched, she finally realized whose chakra it felt like. It felt like Naruto's. The warmth, the strength, the power, it was all there. There was no doubt about it. Was your father the fourth Hokage? Karin asked suddenly. The chakra stopped channeling for a moment, but only to resume. Fukasaku and Lady Shima narrowed their eyes at the redhead and started trying to sense her abilities through the use of Senjutsu. But Naruto, though, had a small smirk on his face when Karin asked. To hear people ask if the fourth was his father made him smile. Even though it's only happened a few times. He knew his father at least. Once the chakra transfer was over and the seals were changed and reformed, Naruto turned to face Karin and gave her a small smile. Tell me all you know, and I'll tell you what you want to know. Naruto smiled softly. I'm pretty sure you have one hell of a story to tell, and besides, Fukasaku Jiji and Shima Ba-chan need to trust you first. Where do I start? Karin asked. Naruto stared at the red-headed girl waiting for a response. Karin fixed her glasses and gave Naruto a nervous look and sighed before being led from the building and onto one of the giant leaves that surrounded the ever-twilight-bathed land of Mount Myoboku. Karin sighed, not one to really think of her life, let alone spill her story to people, but maybe, she thought, maybe, Naruto could be the one to take the pain off of her chest and listen. With Taka, or hubby, or whatever crazy name Sasuke had come up with at the time, Karin felt that none of them would give a rat's about her well-being, as shown on the Great Bridge. Her chest started to pulse in pain from the quick flash of what had happened just a few days ago. Then she realized it. That bastard stabbed me, Karin roared. Naruto's eyes went wide and he quickly jumped back behind the two toads. His face was dark with fear and his body was shaking. The amount of malicious intent radiating off of the irate redhead was too much for the blonde to handle. He stared at her backside as she went off on a rant of how much she hates Sasuke and how much she felt that he was scum. But it was during this, Naruto realized how great of a butt she had, and not only that, she was more curvaceous than Sakura could ever be. Naruto stopped himself before he could continue with those thoughts. A bright, crimson blush formed on his cheeks. Darting his eyes to different directions, Naruto couldn't help but continue to stare at the great curves that Kami had blessed his protectorate with. The blonde suddenly had this strange feeling, almost as if Jiraiya was trying to give him applause. Naruto shook his head and started walking ahead once Karin had calmed down and walked by her side. Karin felt the burst of calm chakra coming from behind and looked over to Naruto. She gave him a small smile but looked away as he led her towards a bench and sat her down. Naruto plopped next to her and gazed off into the horizon of the homeland of the toads. It's so beautiful, you know, Karin said. Verbal tick like Ka-chan. Naruto mentally noted. It reminds me of my homeland. Karin sighed and felt the calming chakra of the toads lying on their leaves and the chakra radiating off of Naruto. The land of grass, that's where I'm from. Land of grass? Naruto asked. Jiraiya of the Sannin, my sensei and I, traveled for 3 years, and never had I heard of a land of grass. Well, that's what I've always called it. Our country never really had a name, Karin replied, but it was a land filled with wondrous fields of green and oceans of soft, waving blades of grass. The earth was fertile for farming, and the wind was always cool. I bet if you ever went, you'd want to lie down in the grass and just let the wind take you. Oh, and how can even forget the people? Karin's face suddenly broke into a smile. They were some of the kindest I've ever known. They were sincere and genuine in what they meant, you know. Much better than what most of Konoha is, or at least was. Naruto replied, "It seems you've had a better life than I did. So if you don't mind me asking, how in the world did you know of Sasuke?" "Well, it happened almost 4 years ago," Karin replied. "It was during the Chunin exams here." "What?" Naruto's eyes were wide with surprise. He did not see this one coming. "Well, this is what happened." Flashback. "Damn idiot teammates," Karin groaned, "leaving me alone to find food for our encampment. The nerve." Karin had a bag full of berries and sticks for firewood, and in her hand that the girl was dragging, was a rope that led to a tied-up deer that she had caught and killed. She looked around and fixed her fogged glasses and looked around and began to try and sense where everything was, only to get barraged by the hundreds of thousands of different chakra signatures that filled the forest. The signatures ranged from animal to human, to animal once more, only to go to some strange creatures that Karin had never even sensed before. Suddenly, there was a deep guttural growl coming from just ahead. The ground shook slightly, causing Karin to yelp in fear once the source of the growl was seen. It was a massive bear with teeth just as large. Karin jumped back and hit the ground and began to try and slide away, but the bear raised one of its massive paws and brought it down, forcing Karin off the ground. The girl grabbed onto a branch of a tree, leaving her food and resources on the ground below. After making a quick calculation of her position relative to the best kill spot to the bear, and not taking into account the abilities of such a large bear, she dropped down onto the creature and reached for the knife in her glasses, but just as she was about to get the bear rose, and slapped the red-headed girl away, smashing her into a tree. The bear glared at Karin and looked like it was about to eat her. It began to walk forward with a small pace and growled menacingly at the redhead. Karin shut her eyes waiting for the inevitable, but there was a small bang. It was followed by a shout. Karin's eyes sprang open to see a black-haired boy with a blue shirt, drop-kicking the bear in the head. After another series of the same powerful kicks delivered, the boy stood tall with his back to the redhead, showing off his clan crest. "What's your name?" Karin asked out, her voice meek from the near prospect of getting eaten. "Sasuke. Uchiha Sasuke." Once those words left his mouth, the black-haired boy took off into the forest, leaving Karin behind to her own devices. Flashback over. "That's interesting," Naruto said. "What happened to you after the exam?" "I ended up becoming Orochimaru's top scientist, and I'm only 16. Karin laughed. "But the things I had to do." "Don't go into detail," Naruto made a quick reply. "I don't want to hear about how Orochimaru likes to gush over children." Karin suddenly shut quiet. Naruto looked around thinking that he had just said something stupid. He started to feel slightly awkward, but then, Karin started shivering. Naruto was about to place a hand on her shoulder, but she shot her head up and burst into hysterical laughter. Naruto's eyes were wide with fear, and the boy started to slide away. "Wait, that's just the funniest thing I've heard in a while." Karin laughed. She began to laugh so hard that tears began to fall from her face. The redhead began to cry harder than she laughed. Soon enough, Naruto realized that she was actually sobbing. The blonde quickly grabbed her and held her tightly and began to whisper softly, in hopes of that being able to calm her down. Her body trembled as she wept into his shirt. Naruto, under different circumstances, would have bolted off towards Kami knows where, and would have left the girl here, but he had a good understanding of who she was and what she's been through. Though not as smart as he would have wanted, but not as dumb as everyone thinks, Naruto understood her. For a girl that's been doing experiments on people for a long time and working alongside some of the scummiest people on the planet, and even joining up with the Akatsuki, Karin was probably on the verge of breakdown. The catalyst was Sasuke stabbing her through the chest with his Chidori spear. I've tried so hard to be good at something, Karin continued to weep. But whatever I was good at, it was either morally wrong or it was just for my body. Wait, Naruto sat Karin up and stared into her crimson eyes. What do you mean, Sasuke? Karin started, but quickly stopped herself and looked away as tears began to sting in her eyes once more. That Naruto growled and gripped the bench. No, I wanted it though, Karin quickly replied. I was naive and I was just so stupid all this time. Doesn't mean that I'll accept it, Naruto replied. After hearing this, you are definitely going to stay with me for a while. What? Karin asked with a tilted head. I don't want anything to happen to you, at least anything bad. Naruto replied with a heartwarming smile. I can tell that you've been through a lot of shit, it's okay though, it's because well, I have too. What do you mean? Karin asked while resting a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Wasn't your father the fourth Hokage? I'm a Jinchuriki, Naruto replied. For the longest time, I was hated, despised, ostracized, insulted, everything that you can think of. I didn't even know who my parents were. No one knew who my parents were except for the old man third Hokage. Why didn't he tell you? Karin asked with a deep glare marring her face. I swear he did it to protect me. Naruto interrupted. My father, as I'm pretty damn sure that everyone knows, was a powerful man, with powerful enemies. To tell you the truth, I understand what the third was thinking when he didn't tell people or me of my heritage. But, still, he could have at least put you in an orphanage or in foster care. Tried. Didn't work. Naruto frowned. They kicked me from the orphanage. No one would take in the demon as their foster child either. So I lived alone in a stinky, rotten, rundown apartment. My room only looks good because I constantly cleaned it to make sure it didn't remind me of the situation I was thrust into. The pain of loneliness and the heartache of having no family, it's only made me and molded me into who I am today, so I wouldn't change that for anything. You wouldn't give up being an orphan with no family for having a family? Karin asked with a raised voice, but Naruto only shook his head. I wouldn't. Naruto gave her a look. I did, you and we wouldn't have met, and you would probably be on death row by now. Sad to say this, but I probably wouldn't even have the same will and drive as I do now if I had a family. I think I understand you a bit more, Karin said with a small smile. So, onto a better note, for how long are we going to be staying here? I don't know, Naruto replied. Naruto-chan, Karin-chan, Shima said suddenly. You two can leave now. We've received the perfect amount of information. We'll reverse summon you two back to Konoha. In Konoha, with a pop of smoke the two reappeared in the prison cell with Ibiki rubbing his temples while the two other interrogators were arguing with each other once more. Karin felt a small smile grow on her tear-stained cheeks at the interaction between the Konoha shinobi. With a quick peek at their chakra signatures, they felt warm like Naruto's but nowhere near the same level. Ibiki gave the redhead a stern look before he reached behind his belt and brought out some handcuffs. Naruto saw this and quickly entered Sage mode and three clones burst into creation and grabbed Ibiki in his handcuffs while holding down the other two interrogators. Naruto's Toad Sage eyes stared at Ibiki with a powerful gaze. But before any words could be said, the door opened from behind and in walked Tsunade with Naruto at her side. Ibiki, there's no need for cuffs, the woman said with a kind tone. Naruto has taken the job of keeping her in line. Are you sure, Tsunade-sama? Ibiki asked. Of course. Now then, Karin, Naruto will take you to his temporary home. Tsunade nodded to the people of the prison room and Karin bowed deeply to the woman before hurrying out of the building. Once on the street, she and Naruto walked side by side with the people staring at them with confused faces. Naruto wasn't surprised. Karin hasn't been seen before, but he was also pretty sure that he would get a mouthful from Sakura, should she find out that Naruto was now caring for Karin. Naruto gave a small laugh, receiving a glance from Karin. The redhead simply shook her head and rolled her eyes in response. Karin smiled at the blonde and started to walk at a slower pace to stay at his side. "You know, I think I can start to like this setup." With a short, but somehow long and not so boring journey made, the two arrived at Naruto's temporary living quarters. As a sign of thanks from the construction corps of villagers, they made him a great condo and replaced all of his former furniture and belongings with even better products. His sinks and refrigerators were top of the line, his toilet was top of the line, even his damned shower was top of the line. His floorboards were no longer just wood but instead tile. He had beautiful carpets strewn into the floors for a more comfortable walk. Karin was surprised by the scene and looked to Naruto, half hoping that his heartbreaking story of being a pariah in Konoha was fake, but Naruto simply shrugged and headed straight for the couch and unzipped his black and orange jumpsuit jacket, revealing a black skin-tight shirt that showed off his well-defined muscles and toned body. Karin blushed a mighty storm, and quickly looked away. "Wait, if you're going to stay on the couch, where am I going to sleep?" Karin asked. "Why, the bed, of course." Naruto replied without even looking up. I can't do that." Karin looked in awe. It's why your home I see can't impose." "I don't really care." Naruto slid out of the couch and walked up to Karin with a playful smirk on his face. "What are you Karin yelped out with a bright blush growing on her face as Naruto swept her off of her feet and into a bridal-style position. Karin's face was soon enough, just as red as her hair. Naruto shook his head and slowly slid his bedroom door open to reveal a large king-sized bed and slowly laid Karin onto the mattress. Karin was surprised with the cleanliness of the bedroom and quickly surmised that Naruto doesn't really spend much time in this room. "You know, this is actually the first time I've ever even touched this bed." Naruto whispered. What? Why?" Karin looked at him with an incredulous look. "This thing feels amazing. I'm not really one for material possessions, or even nice things for that matter." Naruto replied and sat on the bed as Karin moved over. "This place is a bit too much for me, you know. I'm just not really used to having so much." "Don't worry, Naruto. I'm pretty sure you'll get used to it someday." A few weeks later. For the past few weeks, Naruto and Karin were practically inseparable. They lived together and Karin had no idea where to go, so it was understandable. But they didn't just go anywhere, they went to Ichiraku Ramen and to different places that are frequented for couples. Many of the villagers began to get a hunch that Naruto and the redhead of Konoha were starting to fall for each other. Though a bit too soon in their quite fragile friendship to be thinking like that, Karin couldn't help but think that way. Naruto was kind-hearted, smarter than what he let on, and a hell of a lot stronger than what she originally thought. But the thing Karin loved the most, Naruto let her have his bed, while he slept on a couch. Though that sounds mighty selfish, Karin actually, for the first few days of them living together, argued with the blonde to let her sleep on the couch rather than on the bed for once, but Naruto simply replied to the effect of saying, "You're a guest, I can't do that to you." Karin, at the moment she gave up asking, realized that Naruto was probably one of the most hard-headed idiots she's ever met, and to be frank, it aggravated her at times. His idiocy, though, was one of his major flaws that drove the bespectacled girl up the walls. Though he was smarter than what he let on, he was still an idiot. But at least he was a kind-hearted idiot. Karin for so many hours put in large arguments and amounts of pain into the blonde Jinchuriki only for him to continue his idiotic ways. But returning to the bed, even though the bed was nice and soft, and surprisingly comfortable, Karin struggled to sleep a lot, because of the change of lifestyle and the change of crowd. Normally, she'd be to sleep or not even sleep because she'd be moving around with Taka, or hubby or whatever Sasuke felt like naming their group. Some of those dreams turned into very vivid nightmares. But Naruto's calming, peaceful and loving chakra always filled her mind and her heavy heart, forcing those dreams away and filling her dreams of him. The peace of being with Naruto for the past few weeks made Karin rethink her life, and now, she was definitely starting to fall for the hero of Konoha. How could she not? Karin was also becoming friends with a few of the Konoha 11, while slowly making her way to becoming friends with the more influential ones in Naruto's life, namely, Haruno Sakura and Hyuga Hinata. Upon meeting Hinata, Karin could sense the amount of love in her chakra being directed towards Naruto whenever they were seen together. Karin could see how obvious it was that Hinata was in love with Naruto, and from what the redhead had found out, Hinata confessed her emotions for the blonde, but Naruto either didn't reciprocate the feelings or just didn't bring up the subject again. Karin, though, was surprised by the obliviousness of Naruto when he didn't realize how obvious Hinata's feelings were for him. But, Karin had to say though, of all of Naruto's friends, she felt that she hated Sakura more than the rest. Sakura, upon their first meeting since Sakura healed her at the bridge, the Pinkett immediately interrogated the redhead about the reasons for why Naruto was taking care of her. Karin defended herself from the prying Pinkett, but Sakura didn't let up, showing Karin that Sakura held the same stubborn will of Naruto. Within minutes of the interrogation, the two of them blew up into a great screaming battle with both releasing their inner personalities. Karin during their argument showed that she held the same super strength that Sakura did. Sakura got too violent with the argument and punched down on the ground, shooting up a large amount of earth and rocks from the training ground while Naruto was staying away from the volatile redhead and Pinkett. He hid in a tree, remembering Sakura's inhumane super strength from training and worried for Karin's health. But just as Sakura rose her fist from the ground, Karin rammed her fist into the ground, splitting the training ground in half, launching dirt and boulders high into the sky. Naruto had nightmares of the event for a few days. The poor boy was launched from his branch of safety and landed on the ground below to face the hailstorm of falling stones and boulders falling from the sky above. Naruto had a quick glance of Karin and shivered at the sight. Karin's face was dark as a malicious smile was spread across her face and her glasses were covered in lens glare. Oh, that day brought smiles to the redhead's face every time she thought of it. But now, she was sitting in the hospital getting processed into the hospital core. Karin sat in silence and read a special copy of Ika Tactics. She had her face buried in the pages in the book, receiving estranged looks from other nurses and med-nins. Karin paid no attention to them, seeing as she was completely engrossed in the contents of the smutty novella. But her mind was on her wonderful roommate and guardian. The blonde was at times, she had to admit, a bit of a handful because of his outgoing persona, but she could honestly say, he was a great person to be around. Karin sighed though and looked away, remembering what he said at Mount Myoboku. Even though it was so unimportant, it made her heart flutter. He had called her beautiful because of her red hair, the same red hair that she seemed to despise more than anything else in the world. Another smile formed on her lips. She unconsciously slid a hand through her red hair and fixed her brown-framed glasses and continued to read. Little did she know though, Naruto was going out of his way to make sure that she felt accommodated in Konoha. The blonde hero was in the Hokage Tower having a grand debate with Tsunade to allow Karin some privileges. "Ba-chan," Naruto said once again, "if we're going to help me train and tame the Kyuubi, then don't you think having a censor like Karin with me to make sure nothing wrong happens? I would love to do that, Naruto, but I can't just let a prisoner, protectorate of the hero or not, waltz freely around the world." Tsunade replied. "But, come on," Naruto quickly replied, "the moment I leave her, who knows what's going to happen to her?" "You think I haven't thought of that, Naruto?" Tsunade reprimanded. "The only choice is to throw her in jail." "No," Naruto growled. "I made her a promise that I wouldn't let anything like that happen to her." "I know that, but you need to think of this from my perspective." Tsunade pinched the bridge of her nose. "Let me give you a basic overview of her rap sheet. I already know it, Ba-chan." Naruto sighed in exasperation and sat up from his seat. "She told me already. Then you should know why I can't just let her leave and come with you." Tsunade replied with a stern expression. "She could, for all we know, could be a spy working for Orochimaru that purposely got herself captured." "But I know she isn't," Naruto replied. Naruto, Tsunade's eyes were wide. Are you falling for her? What? Don't be absurd, Ba-chan. Naruto replied with a small tint of a blush forming on his cheeks. She's just a friend. Whatever you say, Naruto, Tsunade laughed. But getting back to our argument, I can't allow Karin to leave the village just because you say that you trust her. She's not even a shinobi aligned to any village. Then make her a shinobi of this one. Naruto blurted without thinking. You want to run that by me again? Tsunade asked with a raised eyebrow. Goad him into it. I was saying, make her a shinobi of this village. Naruto replied with a little less than adequate confidence. She's a good medic, hell a damn good one, and she's literally one of the best sensors I've ever met. She could tell if someone's lying just by reading their chakra. Those are skills that I've got to say that are priceless. You drive a hard bargain, Naruto, but you still haven't convinced me. Tsunade smirked. Just a little more, then put her in a new team of genin that are trying to become chunin. Hell, you could even put me in that team. Naruto stood from his seat and rested his knuckles on the desk with his head dropped low and his hair covering his eyes in shadow. Naruto, she isn't even a genin. Tsunade-sama. The Hokage's eyes went wide, but Naruto went ahead and chose to continue. I will never call you that ever in your life, but I am now, just to show you the gravity of this situation. I'm listening, Naruto. Tsunade motioned for the blonde to continue. I'm not as dumb as most thought I am, well, at least not anymore. Naruto whispered. I know of the war, and don't act so surprised either. I talked to the great Toad Sage, and remember, he's all-seeing and all-knowing. I need to control the Kyuubi so we can strike a defining blow against the Akatsuki on the battlefields. With me there in control of the Kyuubi's power, we'd be unbeatable and there wouldn't be any senseless casualties. Well, Naruto, you're only a genin. No one will listen to you, even if you have the power and the skills. Then let me and Karin go to the Chunin exams coming up soon in Sunagaku. Naruto replied without a stutter in his words. We have the skills, we have the abilities. Let Karin get into the shinobi corps, I'll vouch for her. I'll do all I have to do to keep her safe. Why? Tsunade asked. I don't know. Naruto sat back down. There's something about her. I think that she's a main part of this prophecy that the Great Toad Sage was talking about. She's important, or else the Great Toad Sage would have told her to leave. It's happened before, you know. So you're saying? Tsunade stopped to think back to the beginning of the conversation when he ran the prophecy by her the first time. Karin could be the mother of the red-haired clan or the red-eyed clan. Not really. I'm just saying that Karin is important to it all. Naruto replied. The first step to all of the strife is by doing something that could change the course of the entire prophecy, and I intend to do this as the first step. Karin is strong, Ba-chan. She just needs the right push to bring it out. I saw her potential firsthand when she sparred with Sakura. Alright, Naruto, you've convinced me. Tsunade threw her hands up in defeat and sighed. You've won me over. Really? Naruto looked up with a hopeful expression. You sure gave up pretty soon. Nah, I was just enjoying our argument. Tsunade gave him a small smile. Naruto face faulted but straightened up and rubbed the back of his head. Now get the hell out of here, Gaki. I have some blasted paperwork to do. You got it, Ba-chan. Outside, Naruto walked down the street with a smile beaming off of his face. After spending the last few weeks in the company of the irate redhead known as Karin, Naruto couldn't help but feel his heart flutter while being in her presence. Maybe the old hag was right. So what if he did have feelings for Karin? It's not like it mattered anyway. At least that's what Naruto told himself. After the nights when Karin would have those vivid nightmares of hers and he'd have to calm her down using his chakra, the blonde felt inclined to keep her happy and keep her safe. Besides, she was living with him, for crying out loud. But the last nightmare she had was of Sasuke and what he had done to her. Her screams and her gasps for air were embedded into his mind. The genuine fear and pain being released from her voice was palpable. When Naruto woke the redhead from her slumber, Her once crimson eyes were pale in comparison to what they normally were. The memory of her pain was a sore spot in his mind. Her tears spilled onto his clothing and her cries were deafening. But the real problem, though, was making sure that her glasses stayed safe and unblemished. Without them, Karin was as good as blind. Knowing firsthand of how bad it was Karin reacted, Naruto never again wanted her to experience that fear. He shook his head of those depressing thoughts and began to sift through his memories for more appropriate images. Especially that one time when he and Karin went for a walk in one of the newly formed parks. The green grass waving softly and tickling their arms and legs, and the soft winds blowing through their hair, Naruto smiled at the serene image but shook it off, knowing that if he continued on those thoughts, he might bump into someone. Where could she be? Naruto thought to himself. She is a medical person, so the hospital is a good place to check. At the hospital. Thank you for your time, Karin-san. I hope we'll see you again. The nurse bowed to the redhead with a smile spread on her face. Thank you too. Karin replied with a curt bow and walked out through the glass doors only to smash face first with Naruto. Holy shit! Karin screamed out. Naruto looked up to see Karin with eyes as wide as plates and her glasses just a few feet away on the sidewalk. Karin frantically felt around the sidewalk looking for her glasses, but with no luck. The blonde saw this and held her still just before she began to hyperventilate. Naruto reached over and grabbed the glasses from off the ground and slowly slid them onto her face. Once the glasses were slipped on, Karin's world became clear and filled her irides with the most beautiful scene she's ever laid eyes upon. Naruto was sitting in a golden light, with clouds floating above them and the sun glimmering on his tanned skin. His hair waved over his Hittite-less forehead and flittered over his right eye from the wind blowing through their faces. A bright, face-splitting smile was spread on his face. Karin couldn't help but feel a blush forming on her cheeks but quickly pushed the blonde away in an attempt to keep her dignity. Naruto was confused but stood up and pulled Karin to her feet. The redhead quickly ran a hand through her unkempt half of hair and made a failed attempt to comb it straight. The two coughed awkwardly and looked away from each other only to make a powerful link of eye contact. So, Karin drawled. What are you doing here? Looking for you, of course. Naruto smiled once more and put his hands behind his head. I've convinced the Hokage to make you a genin of Konohagakure no Sato. Karin's eyes went wide. She was frozen in place with her mind flying and spinning in all directions without much thought in her red head. Her brain was painfully fried with little cognitive ability. Her head tilted slightly with her mouth parting slowly only to close like a gaping fish, almost as if the information had stolen her ability of speech. You're going to get processed into the Shinobi Corps. Naruto smiled. It was thanks to me that you are able to walk around the village without the need to have me watch your back from those in the village that want you gone. Thanks, Karin gave Naruto a nervous smile. But, I kinda wanted to get away from the shinobi life, you know. Oh, Naruto felt his heart crack for just a moment. I see. Karin's eyes went wide for a moment when she felt the sudden change in emotion. His chakra seemed dark, almost as if it was depressed, heartbroken. Karin looked back at Naruto and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and gave the poor boy a smile. Naruto saw the look in her eyes, they were genuine with her actions. Karin didn't mean to hurt the boy's feelings, but she just needed Naruto to know that she didn't feel it. And Naruto, Karin sighed. Alright, here's what I'll do. You go off and train and I'll have to think this whole ordeal over, alright? You sure? Naruto asked. You'll think of it, of course. Karin gave him a warm smile before sliding her hand off of his shoulder and walking off. I'll see you at home. Naruto watched her walk off down the road and towards their home. Their home. Naruto smiled and looked off towards the sun. He liked the sound of that. To finally come home to someone, even though that someone was just a friend. Just a friend, huh? Naruto laughed softly and looked off towards Karin's fleeting silhouette. Her bright red hair blowing in the wind as she took each step, with each descending move, her hair jumped just a few millimeters. The girl though suddenly stopped sensing Naruto's emotion and turned just enough so that her eyes could be seen staring back at him. Blue locked with crimson. Blushes began to creep on their faces as they continued to stare at one another, but Karin was the first to break and started to hurry off down the street as she sunk into her collar to hide her deep blush. Naruto though stood enchanted in the center of the street for the entire world to see. His extra strap of his hitai blowing wildly in the powerful gust of wind. He let out a soft sigh and turned around to head for the nearest training ground. People nodded to him and greeted the hero and even gave him free foods and shinobi supplies as he walked down the main strip of Konoha. Slowly, Naruto was getting used to the kindness in their actions, the kindness in their smiles. Naruto now began to smile back and wave towards those who went out of their way to let him know that he was no longer hated. Naruto stood straight and slid his hands into his pockets with little care and continued on his quiet journey to the training ground. Karin though was having a more difficult situation. She was still red-faced with a heavy blush still adorning her cheeks. Her red eyes darting from here to there, looking for something to take her mind off of what she felt from Naruto's chakra. It was powerful, stronger than anything before. It felt protective and caring. It felt like love, attraction. Karin didn't want to accept it and quickly pushed it away. To her, it was too damn early for that. Even though they've been living together for nearly a month, neither of them should be having those feelings. Karin stopped in the middle of the street and turned to her right only to see a reflection of her. Karin raised a hand and ran it through her red locks only to sigh in disgust. Her eyes trailed away and towards the corners of the mirror and up towards her actual body. Though not as curvy as someone like Hinata or Ino, but still curvier than Sakura, Karin couldn't help but say that she looked good physically, but it was her personality that she was afraid of. What if he gets to know the real me? Karin continued to stare at herself, while unknowingly caressing the unkempt side of her red hair. What if he tosses me aside once he knows the true me? Hell no, he won't. Karin could have sworn that her reflection just shouted that to her. You felt his chakra. He is sincere, unlike that Uchiha bastard. But before everything went to shit, Sasuke's chakra felt the same way. Karin thought to herself, Kami, why the hell was I so stupid? You were being naive. Every girl our age is like this. Reflection. Karin replied, just sleep it off. You know what, I'm sleepy. Karin stretched and continued on her journey towards her new home. Ooh. Naruto stood in front of a small grave site that he put together himself, with 3 kunai embedded in the ground in a triangle formation. In the center of the triangle was a gravestone with a bouquet of flowers made from paper, a small green book and a picture. The picture itself was the most important of the 3 objects. In it was a picture of Jiraiya sitting down with Naruto fast asleep on Jiraiya's back. The blonde-haired boy smiled softly at the image and the memories that came with it. He stood from his bent knees and bowed his head to the gravesite and tightened his hitai. Naruto threw up the cross-hand seal and poof, 2 clones popped into existence. The 2 of them stared at Naruto, immediately getting the message. The 2 clones dropped down in cross-legged positions and began to meditate. Their job was to work on gathering Senjutsu chakra as quickly as possible. The real Naruto channeled Senjutsu chakra into his body as quickly as possible. Once he was finished, the eyes of the Toad Sage were upon him. Orange eye shadow grew with the eyes of toads taking place instead of his regular cerulean orbs. Naruto channeled some chakra and sent out a strange signal towards the rest of the forest in an attempt to rouse any bloodthirsty animals. Knowing full well that fighting another human was terrible and killing an animal was no different, he needed to get attacked first. But, suddenly, the ground began to shake as a great beast began to tear through the forest, ripping trees from their roots and the ground itself. In front of Naruto was a great gorilla, not native to Hai no Kuni, or anywhere that he knew of at least. The gorilla launched its fist down, launching up a great hailstorm of boulders and rocks, much like how Karin does. Naruto weaved in between each boulder as it descended and charged forward for the beast itself. Naruto looked around with his sensory ability and found that his two clones were in danger and needed to be protected. Naruto turned his attention back to the gorilla and formed an Udama Rasengan just before he rammed the ball of volatile chakra into the gorilla's face, knocking it back. Naruto slowly floated down to a tree branch below and stared off at the massive creature he was facing. The gorilla sat back up and glared at the blonde standing proudly from the top of his tree. This training got more serious, I guess. Naruto thought to himself. Yo, Kyuubi, think you can lend me some of that oh-so-coveted chakra of yours? Don't sass my power, runt. Kyuubi replied with a growl. Just be lucky that I don't like losing. Now get lost and beat that stupid primate. Yeah. Naruto shut his eyes for just a moment, but once he opened them, his eyes came to reveal the Toad Sage Mode eyes, but with a black slit going down the center vertically. The orange eye shadow that formed turned into a blood-red color. The gorilla felt his sudden increase in power and began to surge its own chakra, blowing away a few trees in the process. This gorilla wields its chakra as well, but isn't smart enough to use ninjutsu, Naruto thought to himself. Suddenly, the beast swung its hand down at unbelievable speeds, annihilating the tree that Naruto once stood on. Naruto, though, was able to dodge the attack and landed on the back of the gorilla's furry hand. The boy narrowed his eyes at the malicious look that the gorilla was sporting, but they quickly sprang open. Naruto jumped off of the gorilla's hand as he had sensed something big coming from the gorilla. It was powerful, hot and extremely dangerous. The beast bent back as a great surge of chakra was felt building up in the gorilla's belly, just before a great gust of hot wind came from the massive primate. The gorilla's belly began to glow a dangerous orange color, just before the gorilla belched out a fireball the size of the Fire Country. Naruto's eyes grew wide at the sight, but he didn't show any fear. If anything, he welcomed this new and somehow powerful-looking beast. The massive ball of fire came closer and closer, incinerating everything it flew by, and turned trees into instant ash, surprising Naruto of its actual power. The sage shut his eyes and channeled as much Senjutsu as he could, knowing full well that if he failed, it was over for him. Naruto applauded himself, knowing that the best way for him to perfect his skills was under pressure. He channeled the Senjutsu chakra into a massive and invisible blade. Molding and folding, carving and building, Naruto forced as much as he could into the blade. Since his chakra control was shit, he was struggling harder than what he should be. Looking back at his clones, the two of them had finally finished gather enough Senjutsu chakra to last at least 10 minutes each. He smiled softly and formed two shadow clones, both imbued with Senjutsu, and the three Narutos began to mold the chakra into the great blade that the original required. Just as the fireball got within range, Naruto swung the great invisible blade down, and split the great ball of fire in half, and dissipated the attack altogether. The gorilla growled and screeched at Naruto, signifying its terrifying charge. Naruto shut his eyes as his two clones charged forward with Udama Rasengan formed in their hands. The two clones jumped up and rammed the attacks into the gorilla, blowing it back a few feet, leaving it open for a third attack. Once the smoke and chakra residue subsided, a Rasenshuriken came zooming in at amazing speeds. The attack rammed the beast in its chest, blowing it high into the sky, before the attack itself expanded in proportion to the amount of chakra the beast had. When Naruto looked up towards the beast, all he could see was a gigantic spear of spiraling chakra, shooting wind and blades of energy in all directions. It was such a powerful attack, that even the clouds were contorting to the energy being released from his attack. Once the chakra cleared, the gorilla began to fall back to the ground below, unconscious and unknowing of its own fate in the fight. Naruto dashed forward with his two clones at his side as they channeled chakra to their legs to make them go faster. Once they got underneath the gorilla's shadow, the three began to channel as much Senjutsu chakra as they could to their arms and legs and bodies, to empower themselves so they could catch the blasted creature thing, so the beast wouldn't die. Karin finally plopped down onto the bed of her home. She was too tired to take her pesky glasses off of her face, so she just laid on her back, allowing her body to rest. But something was bothering her. She rolled up her sleeves and traced her fingers on all of the tooth marks and bite scars that Sasuke left on her body. She raised her arm and examined the different patterns and random placements. It never ceased to surprise her that Naruto hadn't found out about her abilities yet, or her scars. There were some that she didn't feel that she could explain. Some scars on some places that were meant for the eyes of her lover. She shut her eyes and growled fiercely and pushed herself further up the bed and rested her head onto the soft and comfortable pillows at the head of the bed. She crossed her bare arms over her chest and let her mind drift. The sudden smell of fire filled her nose. It was powerful, overbearing. She shot her eyes open to a sight that sent shivers down her back. The entire village was ablaze. Standing in the center of the fire was Uchiha Sasuke, drenched in the blood of his former comrades. His Sharingan blaring for all who dared to stand up against him. He glared at Karin, but then, the glare disappeared and was replaced with a horrific smile. Ooh, Naruto had successfully delivered a pounding on the gorilla and managed to beat it back into the forest. He left his 2 clones to train in gathering Senjutsu chakra faster as he headed into the village. He had his hands behind his head with a calm look on his face, but with sweat pouring off of his cheeks. He looked down at his clothes and felt the need to gag at the horrific smell they had. You know what? I'm going to go home and change first. Naruto frowned but shrugged. He jumped up into the air and landed on one of the rooftops and bounded towards his wooden condo, with a big smile spread across his face. He landed at the front steps and was quickly greeted by the valets and the bellman and was led into the building. Naruto nodded and gave the 2 a generous tip and hurried off to his room. It was a quick run up the stairs, all 30 flights, and Naruto reached his penthouse level and swung the door open to reveal nothing out of the ordinary, almost as if Karin came and went straight to sleep. The blonde shinobi tiptoed towards his room and peeked into the bedroom and smiled softly at the sight. Karin was fast asleep, and even had a small snore. He opened the door fully this time and slowly slid into the room completely silent, using the skills he used to sneak around bullies during the night as a child. He pulled his dresser open and drew out some casual khakis and a black dress shirt. He backed out of the room and clicked the door shut as quietly as he could and changed in the living room of his condo. After checking himself out in his mirror, he made a soft click at himself and headed straight out of the door and back down the 30 flights of stairs and back onto the streets of Konoha. He looked up to the sky and found that the sun was going down and the nighttime scene was soon upon the village. He smiled and trudged off through the streets as he admired everyone and everything he came across. The more he enjoyed everything, the less hatred and burden he felt. With each step, he thought of his role in the coming role, and with each passing smile and compliment, he felt the inhibitions wash away. He looked up once more once he noticed that one of the street lights flickered on. The sky was bathed in a beautiful maroon hue mixed with a slight crimson, almost the same color as Karin's eyes. He couldn't help but feel his lips curl at the thought of his roommate and protectorate. He slid his hands into his pocket and walked off to nowhere in particular, but just as the night scene of Konoha kicked in, the hero of Konoha was stopped all of a sudden by the blonde bombshell of Konoha, Yamanaka Ino. Naruto. Ino called from behind the blonde. Where are you going to? Ino jogged up to Naruto with a slow, tentative pace, almost as if she were trying to seduce the toad sage. Naruto's eyes grew wide as blood shot to his nose. Ino was wearing a beautiful, but thin shirt with no discernible bra underneath to hold back the bouncing nature of her breasts. A blush as bright as the moon above them grew on Naruto's face the longer he kept his eyes glued onto the blonde bombshell making her way to him. And nowhere, Jay just looking for some place to eat. Naruto's face flushed deeply. Ino seemed to not have caught the slip. Really? Ino smiled softly and locked her arm with his. Let's go somewhere. I'm off from work, and Sakura has to work extra at the hospital, you know. I'd love that. Naruto smiled. So where do you want to go to? Ichiraku ramen, Ino asked with a sly smile. How does that sound? Doesn't seem like a very Ino thing of you to offer up, Naruto said with a narrowed eye. Does that really matter? Ino asked with a smile. It's ramen. Well, that does sound really nice. Naruto broke into a faux thinking pose. I suppose we could get ramen. Well, stop supposing, because that's exactly where we're going. Ino smirked and began to walk at the same pace as Naruto. Naruto, though, not one to really check out a woman's assets, had to say, in all honesty, Ino was downright one of the girls he'd ever met. That long blonde hair and her sky blue eyes kept his eyes hooked, but he couldn't forget that body that Ino was blessed with. Her curves were definitely better than Karin, and Ino seemed to have an even better athletic build. Then again, Karin has lived underground for much of her life doing experiments for the pedophile. Naruto looked into his memories and wondered why he was so attracted to Sakura for all these years, when here, Ino was definitely all over him. During their calm walk, Naruto began to think of Ino's skills compared to Sakura, hell, even Karin as well. After a good few moments, he quickly realized that Ino, so far, is the most useful of the three. She had an arsenal of powerful mind techniques, and was also the most beautiful of the three. Though Naruto would probably never say that to her or anyone but himself, the boy couldn't help but think she was the most beautiful girl he'd met, despite her flaws as being one of the loudest, meanest and rudest women he'd ever met. If only she could change her personality just a tad bit, Naruto felt that he'd find her attractive. Naruto's eyes suddenly started to trail down from Ino's bangs and down to her collarbone. Right, Naruto? Ino asked. Oh shit, I wasn't listening to her. Naruto's eyes grew wide for a quick moment, but he quickly straightened up and let out a meek, of course. Seriously, right? Ino began to laugh. I knew that you would be the perfect person to rant to. Oh shit, nice save there, Naruto. The blonde shinobi sighed in relief. You know what, I think I should start learning how to read people's lips. Ino went off on another rant about assholes at her work and bitchy people at the hospital. Though her style of ranting and complaining had a vague resemblance to Karin and Kushina's ranting, Naruto found it boring. She complained about this and that, but at least her voice wasn't as loud as it normally was, or else it would have gone from boring to annoying. They made it to Ichiraku and got themselves a nice booth and ordered their normal amounts of ramen, with Naruto having about 20 bowls and Ino having about 2.5. They ate enjoying each other's presence and had very little care in each other's eating styles. Naruto chose a more manly way of eating and started slurping his noodles in every direction, while Ino, she ate like a starved pig, with ramen broth shooting in all directions. People eating around them gave the two blondes of Konoha estranged looks, and some even left because of their commotion. But neither blonde gave half of a rip. They were enjoying their time together. Once Naruto finished his bowl, he slammed it down, pretty much at the same time Ino had finished hers. Naruto and Ino looked around awkwardly and found that everyone was staring at them. Ino and Naruto's faces grew hot and red from embarrassment, and the two turned to each other. Within moments, the two burst into some heavy laughter. Their laughter was contagious, though. One by one, the people of the restaurant began to laugh with the two blondes. But it died down by the time the two blondes were on their way down the street. It was a surprisingly cool night, compared to the normal temperature that summer nights would be in the land of fire. Naruto and Ino were close together and stayed in a comfortable silence reigning between them. The different stores were bright and open for the various people still walking around at this time of night. Looking up, Naruto found that the sky was clear and the stars of the nighttime sky were twinkling brighter than what he'd ever seen before. The bright crescent moon high into the sky, shining down onto the village with what little light it gave. Naruto looked back down to the blonde he had in his arms. Ino had her head leaned into his arm as they walked. Upon her face was a great smile spread across her face, her white teeth glinting with each light they passed by. Hey, wanna see something? Naruto suddenly asked. Sure, what is it? Ino asked, but before she could continue, she was swept off of her feet and the two blondes took off through the rooftops of Konoha. Ooh, Karin was surrounded by grass, lots of grass. It almost reminded her of her homeland. The soft blades tickling her smooth skin with each breeze that flittered by. Karin shut her crimson eyes and stared off into the bright, beautifully cloudy blue sky and smiled at the warmth coming down from the sun. Its rays pounding through the cool breeze, warming her. She smiled even brighter when she sensed the amount of peace radiating off of Naruto from wherever he was. It was making her dream even more heavenly than what it would normally be. His happiness made her dreams what they were. His happiness soon started to take shape and Naruto began to form in her world. He was wearing a gray t-shirt with black jeans and some sandals. Naruto plopped down onto the grass below with a basket in his hands. The boy smiled softly with the same foxy grin that Karin had begun to love and began to remove the contents of the basket. Naruto motioned for Karin to move. Once she did, the blonde threw out a large blanket and started placing food onto the blanket: rice, chicken, turkey, pork. It was beautiful to Karin, but Naruto of course didn't stop there. He drew out a small wreath of violets and slowly slid them onto her head. Damn, Naruto must be really happy. Karin thought to herself. Never had something like this happened before. Sure, Naruto's chakra was peaceful and loving, but never had it been like this. Karin's heart beat faster as the dream continued and Naruto began to do things that Karin had always wished her dream man would do. Naruto reached out and gently caressed her cheek, feeling the burning hot blush forming on her face. Karin shook nervously with her mouth agape and shakingly pushed her glasses back up. Her breath hitched when Naruto tilted his head, allowing his hair to feel the full force of the incoming breeze. A sudden burst of peace shot from an outside source, most likely Naruto, and the scene began to grow warmer and it made Karin's heart beat heavily. Naruto suddenly grabbed Ino and crashed his lips upon hers. His hands were holding her arms, keeping her close to him to make sure that the redhead doesn't break away too early. The kiss was a simple one, even though both have had many kisses before, this one to Karin felt special. Maybe it was the overflow of happiness from her idiot roommate, or maybe this dream was just a parallel to what she truly wants from the blonde. But the sky suddenly darkened. The grass began to wilt and the trees around them burst into flames. Thunder boomed in the cloudy sky, but no rain fell. From the flaming forest came a spiky-haired boy with red eyes. Karin's own crimson eyes sprang open with fear, but Naruto shot to his feet and got ready to defend the girl. Naruto, Sasuke said, "What are you doing with my cum dumpster? She's no longer yours to toy with, bastard." Naruto growled viciously. Defending a whore, Sasuke burst into laughter as he unsheathed his sword. That's new. What happened to the oh-so-wonderful Sakura-chan? Nothing happened. Why do you think I'm with Karin? Naruto simply replied. The blonde drew out a kunai and hunched over in a battle stance. Kami Naruto. Sasuke laughed just a bit more and stretched his sword-wielding arm. She's a useless whore. I'm surprised that she hasn't left you yet to sleep with the rest of the shinobi corps. Screw you, Sasuke, Karin screamed. I'm not like that. Oh really? Sasuke smiled devilishly. Would you mind if I went ahead and told the dobe of our team's knights? Don't you dare, Karin screamed as tears formed in her eyes.